So object-oriented programming is a programming paradigm where we structure code using object and classes. So these are the two major entities in object-oriented programming to model real-world entities and behaviors. It helps in building scalable, maintainable, and reusable systems. So these are the three major property when we write the code in object-oriented way. So if we see, we have written our code in functional way. So there are two ways. One is functional. We call it functional and object-oriented programming. So functional is the way which we write straightforward functions and we are reusing them like a script. And let's suppose you are writing a small automation. So you no need to follow object-oriented principles. You can write a functional script and do it. But when you are writing big softwares or where the line of code is maybe higher than 1000, or there are certain principles which we can reuse it for security perspective, so you should follow object oriented programming. My recommendation is always go ahead with object oriented programming, use less functional programming. So now what it says, it helps building scalable, maintainable and reusable systems. So these are the three major focus where object oriented programming is best for. So now if we see this as a senior angle, what exactly object oriented programming? It's not about the syntax, it's about design principles. So in our system design class also we have discussed. So whenever we start any development or whenever we are transacting any design into code, we think about the design principles. So solid principle is one of the design principle, which is the most followed principle whenever we are writing the code. Then we have second is there are some design patterns like factory patterns, single patterns and strategy patterns. So after the Python classes, we will discuss those patterns and we'll implement in Python. So these are some patterns and common principles which are developed using object oriented programming, and we are using them. If you see in Python, we prefer composition over inheritance. So there are four properties in object oriented programming. One is inheritance, abstraction, encapsulation, and these are the four principles, or I'd say these are the four features in Python: encapsulation, inheritance, abstraction, and polymorphism. So when we talk about the encapsulation, we are thinking about the security, how we can encapsulate the uh, any data, or we are hiding any data from the outer layer, or we can create the layers. And when we talk about the inheritance, there we think about the code reusability, how we can reuse the code. So as of now, we created different functions and those functions are independently reusable. So those are the modules you can use independently anywhere. There is no relation, there is no restriction, nothing. So there is no security implemented. But what exactly inheritance is? You can reuse the code in following some of the principles and some of the rules so that our data is secure, our properties of the classes are secure. And then when we talk about the abstraction, again we are hiding the data for security reasons. So there are a lot of abstraction layers you can implement on the any object properties or class properties. So that we'll discuss in detail. And when we come to polymorphism, where the same method behaves differently depending on object. So we can have same method, the behaviors we can write for the methods in different way. The business logic also can be different. So those are the four features of object oriented programming. We will discuss each one in detail. And these are used for designing our system or the code with some design like patterns or principles. One of the line here you see a duck typing, it behaves like a duck or it's a duck. So what exactly meaning here is we have again a design pattern backtyping and how we are implementing it so that our application is more scalable, maintainable, and reusable. So these three properties makes Python a smarter programming language. That is why we are not thinking too much about any other programming language or leveraging their features. Like Java has object-oriented programming, and in case you think like Python, if Python doesn't support object-oriented programming, then what will happen? If it's only support functional like C, right? So there will be a lot of limitations and complexity for our development. So in one side we are saying Python is simple, and other side we are not making it simple. So object oriented programming is the actual implementation where we are making Python a simpler programming language. And when it comes to ML projects, start as a script. So let's say you have an any ML project, machine learning project, and those machine learning project basically follow couple of steps. Like one of this ETL pipeline, right? Extract, transform, load. So you are extracting the data from different sources, and then you are putting a transformer on top of it, or you're transforming the data, right? And then you are loading it to somewhere. So when I talk about ETL pipeline in any of the project, and you can write the small functions, no doubt at all. But whenever your code will grow, the requirement grows. So it's not about you are writing a POC in machine learning project. You are writing the lot of features around to that. So when your code is growing more, then these are the problems will occur if you are writing a programming in functional way. So your code will not be that much modular. I agree, like you are having a functions, it's a modular, but not up to that mark where we can separate the data loading or pre-processing or models and evaluations. So we can categorize them, we can classify them into different uh, classes, keep it there, and then the readability and reusability will be higher. And again, this is where you use object-oriented programming. This is the property which you are uh, increasing, because inheritance for base eliminators, mixing for common functionalities. So you can reuse the code. You have a super class, then or maybe parents classes. There can be there is a multiple inheritance support is also there. We will discuss those like different types of inheritances. But yeah, you have a lot of scope to reuse the code. And when we talk about the encapsulation again, so this is where hide complex training loop behind a clean train method, so that a developer or the user is not worrying about the data or the complexity of the training. So let's suppose you are following some of the algorithms, and then so there are two types of build developers. One is who develop the model, let's say model one, somebody who has developed it, and another developer type is who is using it. So when I talk about who is using it, they are not worrying about what how exactly this model been built. They are just putting the data and training it and then using it. That is one of the layer. So we can hide the complex training loops behind some clean methods, and we can provide those methods, or we can expose those methods to use. And when we say about extensibility, so definitely it swap components different feature extractor without breaking any code. So we can extend our code without doing any change in our existing code. So those are the things we will be discussing in a couple of classes. Now the question says when not to use object oriented programming. So these are the three things which I found or I figured it out. So let's say for small scripts, Procedural is simpler. So if you have 100 line of code or maybe a small automation script you want to write, or maybe you are writing a migration script which just load the data from one of the database from single table putting into some other table, like small things. So you no need to worry about object oriented programming that way, or no need to worry, no need to consider that. You can write your programming in functional way. Procedural and functional are similar. For data pipelines, functional programming may be better. So this is where, like I said, like ETL, designing an ETL, but in we have designed it also in function classes. You can design that just if you have only 3 functions or 4 functions, not more than that. So if there is no complexity and the simpler steps, simpler approach, go ahead with the procedural programming. And third thing is, overusing object-oriented programming can make code unnecessarily complex. So this is where, like seniors, we should think about what exactly our requirement is. Should we really follow object-oriented programming for this? Or is it okay if I use functional or procedural? So the decision up to us based on the use case, based on the complexity of application, you can take the decision. So now before moving to class and object concept, there is one terminology in Python we call it. What exactly Python is? It's general purpose programming language. So what is the meaning of general purpose? So let's suppose your requirement is to write the code in functional way, you can write that. If your requirement is to write the code in object oriented way, yes, we do have support. So this is called general purpose programming language. It has the features to write the code in both the ways. That is why Python is quite flexible. So now let's move to class and object. What exactly class and object is? Class is an blueprint of object. So think like any class, let's say fruit or car. So there are different classes in real world we have. Maybe animals is another class. And so if I take fruit as class, this is nothing, it's a blueprint of some objects. Objects are real world entity who consume some space, right? They are the real objects. So if I talk about fruit, fruit is a class. There is no fruit available physically. The fruits names are, let's say, you have apple. So this apple is the object of fruit class. And how exactly we have built these classes? Each class have its own properties. So you think like you in starting, nobody knows about what is fruit. So they have started classifying the objects. They found something and they say, okay, what exactly the property of the apple? What the property of banana? What the property of orange? Right. So they defined some properties, and based on these properties, they created a class. It's something like that. So let's say if I talk about animals, animal is another class. It also have its own property. I cannot say uh, maybe eagle. Eagle is not animal. Why? Because eagle is a object, and its property belongs to the bird class. If I say tiger, yes. Why we are putting a tiger, a object, into animal class? The reason is it belongs to the same properties or it belongs to the same class who have similar properties. So definitely someone who have created these classes like animal, fruits, vegetable, cars, right, all and so on. So they created the class, they have classified the objects, and objects are the one who is real entity, who is a physical entity. And if those objects have the similar property or same property with that class, they put it into that class, right? Or you can think like you found something new and nobody knows about it, what exactly it is. Then what scientist does, so let's say I found some X. This is something, any element. So what they does, and initially they read its property, what are the properties available in this object, and then they look out if do we have any class where, let's say, class 1, class 2, or class 3, do we have any class where the properties of this object belongs to, do we have any? They try to map it. So if we have any property, they say, okay, this object belongs to this class. So this is like a connection you can think in the real world. Similarly, in Python also, we need to create the class first before creating the object. And everything is, if I say about the data type like integer, float, string, or boolean, all are the implemented in the object oriented way. So let's say if I create any integer value, maybe num1 equals to 100, and when I say print type of num1, so it doesn't return directly integer, it says class int. So all the variables or all the data types are having their own class in Python. Okay, so they have their own class. We are actually creating the object of integer class. So there are many classes implemented internally in Python. Now what we are learning here is how to create custom classes, how to create custom objects. So in Python, to create the class, this is very easy. You need to use a class keyword and then class name. So like we were creating earlier functions, we were using a def keyword. Now this is a keyword where Python compiler will understand, okay, this is a class, and this class name can be any name. Any name, it's up to you. Right. Then colon. Similarly, and within this class, you can define the properties. So right now I will use pass here, but class will have its own properties like its own variables or methods, which we will be discussing. So let's create a very simple class here. Class, let's say fruits. So now I'm not defining anything here. I'm just saying pass. So pass is a keyword which is used for unimplemented methods or functions or classes. So this class doesn't have anything, and I'm planning to put something in future in fruit class. Then I have used pass as one of the keyword. So if I don't use pass, it will give an error. See here. So when to use pass? Wherever you use this colon syntax, use pass. Even you can use it into control statement, you can use in loop, you can use in functions, methods, classes, everywhere. Wherever you have this colon syntax, definitely you can use that. That is one of the easiest way to remember. Now let's create one class object. So how you will create the object of this class? Now how to create the object of any class? It's very easy. Let's say any object name. This can be any variable. It's like you can just relate like a variable name. Here we are using a object name equals to, then put the class name here. So whatever class you want to, or whatever object you want to create from that class, that is the same class name here. then use small bracket, like you are calling a function, right, without arguments. So you can pass parameters and arguments here based on the constructor. I'll discuss that. But as of now, our class is a very simple class and it doesn't accept any arguments. So you can create like this. Let's say apple equals to fruits, right? So if I say type of apple, it belongs to fruit class. So that is the difference between internal classes and external classes or the custom classes. So it says like this, it belongs to fruit class. If I created the number here 100, it says class int because this is implemented somewhere. And this fruit class is here in the same module which I'm running it. That's why it is giving main. Okay. So you can create n number of objects. There is no limitation. You can create that. So I created apple and banana, two objects here. So this is the simplest way how you can create the class and object. So now a class can have its own properties and similarly object also can have its own property. So there are three properties: class and object have three properties like ID, a unique ID. So we call it a unique name. Let's say you have a class name here, a fruit. In same module, you cannot create the same class again. So like this. So if I create like this and then try to use it, let's say a1 equal to fruits. So if you run this, what it is allowing. Ideally, I'll tell you. I mean, this is not the way. If I write something in this, if I write some properties into this class should be a unique. Otherwise, there will be a lot of ambiguity or confusion, like which class I should use or which if both are having same name. So that is where we call it one first property is ID. Similarly, object is also having its own ID, a unique name. So each object, you created object 1, 2, 3, and so on. It's have its own name ID. Then there is a behavior. So what we call behavior is how to implement or what are the behaviors like methods. So it have so object is also having its own behavior. This we will discuss in detail. And then class is having its own state. So when we are saying state, it means we are talking about the variables or attributes. So similarly, object is also having its own state like variables. So when we say state of an object or object variable are different variables, class variables are different variables. So we will create first object variables where we have ID, like we have created the object, and we will create some of the variables. So to create the variables, what we will do is there is a constructor which we call or we pass it where we can define the variables. So let's suppose you have a constructor. This is a fixed constructor init, and this is the way you write it: double underscore init double underscore, and then there is a variable self. So this variable can be anything. It's not a like self only. This can be anything. But what rule says, whenever you are creating any method, which is object method. So this is behavior. Behavior is nothing. It's a method here. You are creating methods. So whenever you are creating a method, you create in this way. Within the class, def, then name of the method, then you pass a variable self. So this variable is reserved for the object. So now if you want to pass more values to it or parameters, so let's say var1, var2. So if I print it var1 comma var2 like this, so now there is a change. If I run this program, see the output, it says init missing two required positional argument var1 and var2. Self is fixed. So it means whenever you are creating any object here, at the same time you need to pass the value also. So like this. So let's say you have two values. Num1 is 100, num2 is 200. Now when I'm creating a object apple and calling this class, so this is called constructor. This is the first time when you are initializing the class. So in this class, this is the first method will gets called automatically, and it needs two more arguments, which is mandatory, right? We are not assigning any default value to it. So if it is mandatory, so whenever you are creating a class, you need to pass the values like num1 comma num2. Then only the object creation will be done. So now I'll just comment this section and let's say print apple or print type of apple. So if we see the output is, so now this is the output. So how exactly it is working? Let me just take a snip. So we have created this class fruit. So it's a keyword. Fruit is our user defined name. You can define anything. I have initial just named it as fruit. Now this is fixed method. So if you are passing any, or if you want to pass any data during object creation. So if you see here, I created a object apple of fruit class and I'm passing some data num1 and num2 during the object creation time. So that is where constructor comes into the picture. So in the background, whenever you are creating any object, constructor gets called in automatically. What is the meaning of this? So let's suppose you have a class A, and to check whether init is being called or not, I'll just say def init and I'll just print it. Print object created, something like this. So if you see here, I'm A1 equal to class A. So what I did here, I created the object A1 of class A. I'm not calling this init method anywhere. So if I run this program, then you see this method got automatically called. So how this is happening internally, whenever you are creating an object and you are calling this class, same time this is the special method which gets called in automatically. So that is where you can pass dynamic values to it if you want. So here I have assigned two extra variables. These are the parameters var1 and var2, and during the object creation time you can pass the value to it. So this is one of the way, and this is called constructor. So constructor automatically gets called in whenever you are creating an object. So there are a lot of requirements when we say pass this data during the object creation time. You can write different methods also apart from it. Let's suppose You can create more methods to it. Let's say def get cost. So this method we are creating it, and what it returns, let's say 1000. Now this is not the special method, this is a custom method we are writing. This is fixed, and here we are calling it regular method because we can call this method using object. So what is the object of fruit class we have created? Apple. So using this object you can call this method. You can say apple dot get cost. So this is the way to access the properties. So this is one of the property of the object which you have defined in this class get cost. So now if I print it, let's say r1 equals to apple dot get cost, print r1. So what it returns? It returns 1000. So this is the way. So that is the difference between the constructor. Constructor is a fixed and predefined function, just we are overriding to it. Anyway, it gets automatically called in whenever you create an object. So now here I'm just overriding it. What is the meaning of overriding? I'm just reusing it here to define more property. Like I'm expecting two variables here. And now if you see, this is a regular method, regular in the sense it associated with your object, and whenever you create any method into class, so you are creating the same way like function. So the first variable of the method is associated to your object. So we call it self. Instead of self, you can write anything. So let's print self first. You will understand what exactly self is. So if I say print self, it prints some object here, fruit object at this. And if I print the object also, it's the same. See here, I'm printing apple here, value is same. If I'm printing self also, it is also same. So how Python works, whenever you create any regular method, the first argument of the any method or the regular method you define for the object, it is referring to the same object which you are using. So now instead of self, we can we define something else? Yes, you can. So let's say def, I'll say calculate price, and I'll pass here one variable, let's say var1. And if I print var1, so just print one here, calculating price. So now if I want to use this method, what I'll do? In same way, I'll use the object of this class apple dot calculate price, and we are calling like this. So if I say print, I'll just store it somewhere. Let's say I'm storing into r2 variable, then print r2. So now see the output, calculating price, and the variable var1. I didn't use self here, I use var1. So var1 is again, it's a object which we are using it here. So same object we are passing here. The first argument of the regular method represents your object. Okay, you can use this like as a reference in future. I'll share that some of the examples, but as of now you just say this is your object which you are using while calling it. So let's suppose you created another object banana, and now if I use banana, so I'll use this function banana dot uh, calculate cost, or sorry, calculate price. Then what will happen? I'll print banana also, print this object. So I'll just put one debugger, one line here, splitter about the object banana. So now what is happening? We created a new object banana of fruit class. We are passing some values dynamically at the same time whenever we are creating this object. So these values are assigned to this var1 and var2 of init constructor. Now, what is next? Printing the banana object. So if I print the banana object, this is the object got created. So now this object, when I call calculate price, this method, the first argument of calculate price is the same like banana. Right? This is your banana, same reference. So if you see this, calculate price is having one variable, but when I'm calling it, I'm not passing anything. So internally, it considers the first variable as the object reference. So that is the thing which you need to remember. And one thing, why this self? For more readability and for understanding purpose. So whenever you create any regular method, we are just writing a self so that our understanding is this self is reserved for the object. After this self, you can define n number of variables. It's up to you. But at least one variable should be there so that we can associate this method to the object. I create one more function or the method def assign cost. So now what I'm doing here is self comma cost. So I'm passing a cost for the particular object which you are creating. So I'll just paste it here, or I'll print the cost of object is this. So now if you want to call this method assign cost, you can call it with the apple object, or you can call it with banana object also. Like you can, if you're creating a 40 objects, 50 object, all objects are having all these properties. You can use that. Now let's call this assign cost with both objects like apple and banana. So what I'll do, I'll call this like this apple dot assign cost, and the value I'm passing is 500. So this value will be assigned to cost variable, not self. Why? Because the first argument, the self, is reserved for the object. Similarly for banana. So banana dot assign cost, let's say 600. Then again, this value will go to cost variable. First variable of the method is fixed, or we can say reserved for your object. So if I run it, you see the cost of object is 500, the cost of object is 600. So this is the logic, or this is how you can define more variables in the methods. So now let's suppose you want to define a sequence of function calling within constructor itself. So let's say when we are creating an object, this is one of the function, let's say calculate price is the function will should automatically call. So what you can do is you can define this calling here. Let's say self dot, and now you can define the, or you can call this function like this calculate price, and you can say calculate price is accepting this. So it goes like this var1. So now let's suppose if I run this, I'll just comment this section so that you should not get confused. So now if you see what I'm doing here, whenever I create the object and I want a couple of methods should automatically gets execute. I don't want to call them explicitly. Then you can define it into the constructor. You can call it here. Then it will work. So let's say I have used here calculate price. So that is the meaning, like your first variable is your object itself. So we are saying self dot get cost. So now when I running it, see here I'm able to execute both the methods. I'm not explicitly calling it, but there is a disadvantage of it. It's not specific to your object. So you have defined for every object now. So it's not like whenever I'm creating an Apple object, then only it should get called. No. Whenever I create a new object, so let's say banana, I created another object, then also these two methods will call again. So that is the only disadvantage. So when you can use this approach, let's say I want this logic should be running whenever I create the object. I don't want to call explicitly. So whenever a new object gets created, it should get called automatically. So if your requirement is that way, you can use this. So now let's understand how we can share the values or variables internally with the functions or the methods. So let's say I created a class A, and here in constructor, I will be accepting, let's say init self, and here I have x comma y. There are two variables which I am uh, expecting whenever I create the object of a class. Now I'll just print this object created and the values are x comma y. So now whenever I create the object of class A, let's say a1 equals to class A, and I'm passing the values. This is required. So if you don't pass these two values, if you call it directly like this, then it gives you an error. The error is these are the mandatory parameters. So now how to solve this issue? Either you pass the value to it, x and y, or you can assign some default value also. So if you assign a default value to it, then it will become non-mandatory parameters like in function. So as of now, I'll pass some values to it. Let's say 100, 200. So this is constructor. Now within this class A, I am having, let's say def function 1, and this function is f1 like this f1 method. Then again I have another method f2 method. Then I'll have f3 as well. So there are three different methods available to use. So these are the properties now, right? f1, f2 and f3. So the simplest way to use it using object from outside, I'm saying a1 dot f1. So here I'm calling this method f1. Similarly, I can call a1 dot f2 and a1 dot f3. So all three methods I'm calling it, and then this gets executed. Now my requirement is to use x and y values into f1, f2 or f3. So let's say if I want to use here x, and I say like this, x1 equals to x plus y, right? So now I'm just we can say, let's say we are doing an addition here for x and y. So let me just rename it, let's say add, and I have another function sub, then multiply. So Same time I'll calling here add and sub and multiply. These are the three methods. So now if I run this program now, and what I'm trying to do here is I'm adding the values which we have passed during the object creation time. So it returns an error. What it says, name x not defined, means the variable which you want to access, this is not defined yet. What is the reason? The reason is you pass this value while you are creating the constructor. So the scope of this variable now resides within constructor or this method. So another method cannot use it until you expose it or you create another variable to it. So what is the way? So I create another variable self dot x and I'll assign it like this. So this is not the same exact variable which is created here. I created another variable and I'm assigning the same value to it. And similarly, self dot y equal to y. So I created another variable. So instead of accessing these variables directly, now these values are exposed internally for this object. So you will use like this self dot x and self dot y. So now if I print x1, see the output 300. So whatever value you have passed here, now you are able to use it. So we have exposed the scope of the variables. So how you have created this? We have associated a variable with the object and created a new variable. So instead like doing this, you can do like this also. Let's say in place of x, I'll say a or b, right? So you can create any name of the variable, you can assign it to it. So I'll say self dot a and self dot b. But in most of the programming, or you will see in Git, you check in any code or from Git and you will see. So they are using in this way, like the previous way, self dot x, self dot y, because they don't want to confuse you. They don't want to create unnecessary readability issue. So if I run this also will work because we created a and b. So just for readability purpose, they created the variable with the same name and assigning the same variable. But internally, this x and this x is different. Okay. For better readability, they just say, okay, this is the same value to this. So that whenever I look into the definition of this method, I can directly use it. Same name, x and y. So I no need to go inside the method and see what is the variable assigned to it, assigned to this variable. So I don't need to look out into that. So that is the only benefit of creating variables in this way instead of creating another variable with another name and assigning that variable to that. So I'll use in, let's say, this. So in sub I will use like this. So let's say print self dot x minus self dot y. So I have called it here, see here -10. So even if you are accessing with a or x, anyway we are assigning the same value to it. So this will work. So this is how you can create a seriable variables within methods inside the class. So in the next class, we will discuss about the other properties of object and classes. So before closing for today's class, please complete this quiz. It have four, like 10 questions of each. 10 questions, and each is having one answer, MCQ type. So you can practice it up to the previous class I have covered here in this quiz. Thank you, everyone.